Hello, and welcome to History at Bedtime. In the summer of the year 452, the people of Aquileia climbed onto their walls and looked north across a flat, shimmering landscape. Somewhere beyond the fields, hidden by dust and distance, waited the army of Attila. Aquileia was not an easy city to frighten. It stood near the head of the Adriatic, where roads from the Danube provinces entered Italy, and it had survived wars, imperial rivalries, and generations of danger along Rome's northeastern frontier. Its walls enclosed warehouses, workshops, churches, houses, public buildings, and the accumulated confidence of a place that had long believed itself protected by Roman power. For weeks, perhaps months, the defenders resisted. Attila's men dug, watched, threatened, searched for weaknesses, and consumed the countryside around them. The city remained closed. Summer advanced. Supplies shortened on both sides. An army that lived by movement had been forced to stop before stone. Later writers told a story about the moment Attila decided Aquileia could fall. He saw storks carrying their young away from nests on the city's roofs. The birds, he said, knew that the walls were doomed. He ordered the assault renewed, and soon afterward Aquileia was taken. The story may be legend. It survived because it suited the man whom later ages imagined Attila to be. A ruler who read omens in the movement of animals, who understood fear before other men recognized it, and who could turn a bird rising into the sky into a command that destroyed a city. What happened after the walls failed was real enough. Aquileia was plundered and devastated. Its people were killed, enslaved, scattered, or driven towards safer ground. Other cities of northern Italy watched the smoke and understood that the barrier at the frontier had broken. The Huns moved west through the plain of the Po. Roman roads, built to carry officials, taxes, and legions, now carried news of surrender and flight. To many who lived through that season, Attila seemed less like a king than a judgment. He had already forced the Eastern Roman Empire to pay enormous sums of gold. He had crossed the Rhine into Gaul and fought an alliance assembled by the greatest Roman general of the age. Now he had entered Italy itself, the land from which Roman authority had once spread around the Mediterranean. Ravenna, where the Western emperor lived behind marshes and walls, appeared powerless to stop him. Rome lay farther south. The question moving through churches, villas, military camps, and crowded roads was simple. Would Attila continue until he reached the city whose name still defined the world? He did not. Before the year ended, the Hunnic army turned away from central Italy and withdrew beyond the Alps. A delegation that included Pope Leo I met Attila during the campaign, and Christian memory would later give that encounter the shape of a miracle. Yet hunger, disease, diplomacy, threats against Attila's own lands, and the hard limits of supply may all have mattered. No witness preserved the words that passed between the king and the envoys. The silence around that meeting became one of the greatest legends of late antiquity. But Attila's decision makes sense only when the road behind him is understood. He was not a wild horseman who appeared suddenly before Rome. He was the ruler of a political world that had been forming for generations beyond the Roman frontier. He knew Roman habits, Roman weaknesses, Roman wealth, and Roman fear. He negotiated through interpreters and secretaries. He accepted ambassadors according to ceremony. He judged disputes among subject peoples. He rewarded loyalty with gold taken from emperors and punished disobedience with violence swift enough to become a warning. He could devastate a province and then argue over the exact wording of a treaty. He could demand the return of fugitives one by one. He could sit at a feast using a wooden cup while silver and gold were placed before everyone else, turning simplicity into a display more powerful than luxury. He understood that Rome could be made to pay because Rome needed time. The emperors needed peace on one frontier while armies fought on another. They needed Hunnic cavalry as allies even while fearing Hunnic cavalry as enemies. They needed men like Attila contained, persuaded, divided, or purchased. For years, Attila made himself impossible to contain and too expensive to ignore. Yet almost everything he built depended upon his presence. The Roman Empire had laws, offices, tax records, fortresses, churches, cities, roads, and officials who continued working when an emperor died. Attila's empire had warriors, families, herds, subject kings, tribute, personal promises, fear, and the certainty that the king at its center could reward or destroy. That difference would explain both his power and the speed with which it vanished. Within a year of leaving Italy, Attila would be dead. Within a few years, the peoples who had ridden beneath his authority would be fighting his sons. Within a generation, the empire that had terrified Rome would no longer exist. The man would remain. His name would move through Roman sermons, Gothic songs, Scandinavian poetry, Hungarian legend, paintings, operas, histories, and the ordinary language of fear. He would become the scourge of God, the barbarian at the gate, the destroyer whom civilization remembered long after it had forgotten many emperors. The historical Attila is harder to hold. Most of what survives was written by people who feared the Huns, negotiated with them, fought them, or tried to explain why a Christian empire had been humiliated by a ruler from beyond its borders. The Huns left no history in their own words. No letter written by Attila survives. No law code carries his name. Even the language he spoke cannot be reconstructed with certainty. One witness, however, sat in his hall. In the year 449, an Eastern Roman diplomat and historian named Priscus traveled across the devastated Balkans to Attila's court. He ate at the king's feast, watched his face, heard the voices around him, and recorded details that no legend could entirely erase. Through Priscus, Attila becomes visible. Before reaching that hall, we must cross a much longer distance. We must return to a time before Attila was born, when riders from the eastern grasslands first appeared beyond the Black Sea and entire peoples began moving toward the Roman frontier. The ancient world did not yet know the name it would fear. It knew only that something was coming from the steppe. The steppe does not announce where one world ends and another begins. It runs in immense bands across Eurasia, a landscape of grass, rivers, winter cold, summer heat, and horizons broad enough to make fixed borders appear temporary. Communities living there could move herds across distances that seemed impossible to farmers rooted to villages. Wealth traveled on four legs. A household's survival depended upon pasture, water, kinship, exchange, and the ability to relocate before scarcity became disaster. This did not make steppe peoples rootless. They knew rivers, seasonal routes, burial grounds, alliances, rivalries, and the places where animals could survive. Their world was organized differently from the Roman one. A Roman official measured power through cities, taxable land, offices, written decrees, and walls. A steppe ruler measured it through people who followed, herds that fed them, warriors who answered a summons, marriage ties, gifts, and the reputation that kept allies from becoming enemies. The people whom Roman writers called Huns emerged from this wider world. Their distant origins remain uncertain. For generations, historians asked whether the European Huns were directly descended from the Xiongnu, the powerful confederation that had confronted Chinese empires centuries earlier. The names appeared similar, and stories of westward migration offered an attractive line from Mongolia to the Danube. Yet hundreds of years and thousands of miles separated the two political worlds. Modern archaeology and ancient DNA have made the picture clearer without making it simple. Some individuals buried in the Hun period in Europe had ancestry connected to populations of the eastern steppe, and a small number show close links to elite groups associated with the earlier Xiongnu world. Many others were largely of European or mixed ancestry. The Huns who reached the Roman frontier were not one unchanged people moving intact across a continent. They were a growing and changing confederation that absorbed communities along the way. That diversity would become one of their greatest strengths. A Hunnic army could include men whose families had come from far to the east, Iranian-speaking Alans, Goths, Gepids, Rugians, Syrians, and others whose names are now preserved mainly because Roman authors tried to list them. Political identity did not always follow ancestry or language. A warrior could become part of the Hunnic order by serving its ruler, sharing its campaigns, receiving its rewards, and binding his family to its future. The first detailed Roman description of the Huns came from Ammianus Marcellinus, writing near the end of the 4th century. He portrayed them as almost inhuman, scarred faces, strange food, bodies shaped by life on horseback, men who seemed unable to walk but could sleep, trade, eat, and hold councils in the saddle. His account preserved real observations inside a familiar Roman habit. Roman writers often described outsiders by reversing civilized ideals. Romans lived in houses, barbarians wandered. Romans cooked, barbarians ate raw food. Romans held ordered councils, barbarians shouted from horses. The stranger the Huns appeared, the more Roman the reader could feel. The famous claim that they softened raw meat beneath their saddles may reveal more about hostile imagination than Hunnic cooking. The suggestion that male infants' faces were cut to prevent beard growth may preserve a practice of scarification, but the explanation belongs to an outsider. Even eyewitnesses see through the expectations of their own culture. Their dependence on horses shaped the rhythm of war before a bow was raised. A large mounted force could not remain indefinitely where pasture had been consumed. Animals needed time to graze, recover, and drink. Campaign routes therefore followed water and grass, as well as roads and political targets. This made Hunnic movement astonishingly fast in some conditions and unexpectedly constrained in others. The rider and horse were not one creature, despite Roman descriptions. They were a partnership requiring continuous care. Their military effect is easier to understand. Hunnic warriors grew up around horses and could move rapidly across open country. The composite reflex bow associated with steppe warfare was built from materials such as wood, horn, and sinew. It stored great force in a compact shape suitable for use from horseback. Skilled riders could approach, release arrows, turn, scatter, regroup, and make a slower enemy exhaust itself while trying to force a close battle. Mobility created choices. A settled army protected roads, depots, cities, and political centers. A mounted force could threaten one place, vanish, and appear elsewhere before defenders understood the direction of attack. It could avoid strong walls and devastate the land that supplied them. It could draw enemies into pursuit, stretch their formations, and punish confusion. The Huns were not invincible, and mounted archery was not magic. Horses required grass and water. Large forces needed enormous areas of pasture. Forests, mountains, mud, fortified crossings, and disciplined opposition could limit them. Sieges demanded different skills, often supplied by captured specialists, subject peoples, Roman deserters, or machines learned from enemies. But when the Huns first entered the lands north of the Black Sea in the 370s, the communities there were unprepared for the speed and pressure they brought. The Alans were attacked and partly absorbed. Gothic groups that had lived across a broad region between the Danube and the Black Sea were defeated, divided, or drawn into Hunnic power. One Gothic ruler, Ermaneric, died amid the catastrophe, though later stories disagree about how. Some Goths submitted, others fled west. In 376, a great number of Goths appeared on the northern bank of the Danube and asked the Roman Emperor Valens for permission to enter the empire. They were refugees, but they were also armed communities containing warriors, families, leaders, servants, animals, and political divisions. Roman authorities saw danger and opportunity. New settlers could provide soldiers and taxpayers. If admitted under control, they might strengthen the frontier. The crossing was mishandled. Roman officials exploited hunger, sold food at outrageous prices, and failed to disarm or distribute the newcomers effectively. Violence followed. The Goths rebelled and moved through the Balkans. 2 years later, near Adrianople, they destroyed a Roman army and killed Emperor Valens. The Huns had not fought that battle. Yet without Hunnic pressure, the Goths might not have crossed the Danube in such numbers at that moment. The riders from the steppe had begun changing the Roman world before they directly challenged its emperors. The defeat at Adrianople shocked Rome, but Rome survived. The empire had endured civil wars, invasions, assassinations, plagues, economic crises, and bad emperors before. It negotiated with the Goths, recruited them, fought them, and eventually incorporated many into Roman military politics. The frontier was not a hard line separating two sealed civilizations. It was a region of trade, marriage, raiding, diplomacy, migration, and service. Huns entered that system too. Some fought as Roman auxiliaries. Roman commanders hired Hunnic bands against other enemies. Gifts moved outward from imperial treasuries. Captives and deserters moved in both directions. A Hunnic leader could raid 1 year and accept Roman payment the next without seeing contradiction. A Roman general could denounce barbarians in public and depend upon their cavalry in battle. By the early 5th century, Hunnic groups were no longer distant rumors from beyond the Black Sea. They were part of the balance of power around Rome. One Western Roman commander learned this better than anyone. His name was Flavius Aetius. As a young man, Aetius spent time as a hostage among the Goths and later among the Huns. Although the exact sequence and circumstances are not perfectly clear, hostage status did not necessarily mean chains or a prison cell. Elite hostages could live near foreign courts as guarantees of agreements, learning languages, personalities, military customs, and the ambitions of future enemies. Later legend was tempted to place the young Aetius beside the young Attila. No surviving source proves that they knew one another as boys. Their worlds, however, were already connected. Aetius would rise within a Western empire increasingly dependent on Hunnic support. Attila would rise within a Hunnic ruling family increasingly skilled at extracting Roman wealth. Long before they faced one another in Gaul, each man learned the same truth. Rome and the Huns were not separate storms moving toward collision. They were already using one another. The Roman Empire that Attila would confront was still enormous. From Constantinople, the Eastern Court governed Egypt, Syria, Anatolia, Greece, and the wealthiest cities of the Mediterranean. The Western Court claimed Italy, Gaul, Spain, Britain, and North Africa, although control over those territories was weakening. Emperors still issued laws in the name of universal Rome. Gold coins still carried imperial faces across markets thousands of miles apart. Roads, aqueducts, tax systems, bishoprics, and administrative habits preserved the shape of a state centuries old. Yet unity had become difficult to maintain. After the death of Emperor Theodosius I in 395, his sons ruled separate halves. The division was not originally intended as the birth of two unrelated empires. Romans had shared imperial authority before, but political interests increasingly diverged. Constantinople possessed greater population, wealth, and strategic depth. The Western government faced shrinking revenues, repeated usurpations, and powerful military commanders whose armies were often assembled from federated peoples rather than old-style Roman legions. In 410, Alaric and his Goths entered Rome and sacked it. The city was no longer the ordinary residence of Western emperors, but its symbolic weight remained immense. Pagans asked whether abandoning the old gods had invited disaster. Christians struggled to explain how the city associated with Christian empire could be humiliated. Refugees carried news around the Mediterranean. The sack lasted only days. The deeper loss came in provinces that ceased paying taxes and obeying orders. Britain slipped beyond effective imperial rule. Vandals, Alans, and Sueves crossed the Rhine at the end of 406 and moved through Gaul into Spain. The Vandals eventually crossed into North Africa under their king Gaiseric. In 439, they captured Carthage, depriving the Western Empire of one of its richest regions and a vital source of grain and revenue. Every loss made the next defense harder. The Western court required soldiers, but had less money to pay them. It needed alliances with groups it had once tried to exclude. It granted land, titles, and recognition to rulers whose loyalty depended upon immediate advantage. Roman generals learned to survive not by commanding one national army, but by balancing Goths, Franks, Burgundians, Alans, Huns, imperial troops, local elites, and rival commanders. Aetius became a master of that world. His early career unfolded through civil war. After Emperor Honorius died in 423, a usurper named John took power in the west. Aetius sought Hunnic military support for him and returned with a large force, only to find John defeated. Rather than being destroyed with the cause he had served, Aetius negotiated his own place in the new regime. The Huns were paid and sent home. The moment revealed his greatest skill. Aetius understood how to convert dangerous circumstances into bargaining power. Over the following decades, he fought rivals, commanded campaigns in Gaul, and became the dominant military figure of the Western Empire. Hunnic auxiliaries helped him against Burgundians and other opponents. Roman political survival and Hunnic military power were woven together. Beyond the Danube, Hunnic leadership was also becoming more concentrated. Names appear in the sources and disappear again: Uldan, Charatan, Octor, Rua. Their exact relationships and territories are not always clear. The Roman habit of treating one man as king may have simplified a political order containing several rulers and kin groups. Authority could be shared, regional, negotiated, and constantly tested. Attila was born into the family at the center of this rising power. His father was Mundzuk, brother to the rulers Octor and Rua. The year of Attila's birth is unknown, probably near the end of the 4th century or beginning of the 5th. His mother is not securely identified. We do not know the place where he first rode, the face of the person who taught him to use a bow, or the stories told in his household. There is no reliable account of his childhood. That absence has invited invention. Later biographies imagine the young Attila as a Roman hostage, a neglected prince, an orphan forged by hardship, or a companion and rival of Aetius. These scenes belong to storytelling rather than evidence. The real childhood remains beyond the surviving record. What can be inferred is that Attila grew up near power. He would have watched how rulers maintained followers through gifts. He would have learned the value of Roman gold, silk, wine, weapons, titles, and diplomatic recognition. He would have seen subject leaders come to negotiate, complain, offer loyalty, or provide warriors. He would have understood that a confederation was held together not only by fear, but by distribution. Gold paid by Rome did not simply enrich one family. It moved outward. A ruler rewarded important men with precious objects, animals, captives, and opportunities for plunder. Those men supported households and war bands of their own. Loyalty traveled through the hierarchy as long as wealth and victory continued to travel with it. A failed ruler could lose followers rapidly. A successful one made submission profitable. Attila also grew up in a world where Roman culture was present without being dominant. Roman craftsmen, captives, merchants, and deserters lived among the Huns. Imported goods reached elite households. Diplomats brought letters written in Greek or Latin. Secretaries from the empire could be employed to manage correspondence. Gothic and other Germanic languages were widely spoken around the court. The political center that later astonished Priscus was not isolated from civilization. It was built partly from people and resources taken from it. Rua, Attila's uncle, became the most powerful Hunnic ruler of his generation. He pressured both Roman empires and provided support to Aetius. When groups subject to Hunnic authority fled into Roman territory, Rua demanded their return. Fugitives were not merely individuals seeking safety. Their departure challenged the ruler's ability to control people. If Rome protected them, Roman territory became a refuge from Hunnic power. This issue would remain central under Attila. Rua died around 434. Power passed to Attila and his brother Bleda. They ruled together, perhaps dividing responsibilities or regions, though the exact arrangement is unknown. Roman envoys met them near the frontier at a place called Margus, close to the Danube. The negotiation took place on horseback. The Roman representatives may have preferred chairs, shade, documents laid on a table, and the controlled environment of a formal chamber. The Hunnic kings remained mounted, and the Romans, unwilling to appear inferior, conducted the meeting from their own horses. The posture contained the political argument. Rome still described itself as the center of order, yet its ambassadors had crossed the river to meet two rulers whose power could not be dismissed. The brothers demanded an increase in annual payment, the return of fugitives, equal access to markets, and Roman refusal to form alliances with Hunnic enemies. The agreement is often called the Treaty of Margus. The annual payment was raised to 700 Roman pounds of gold. Captives who had escaped were to be returned or ransomed. Markets would operate under agreed conditions. Rome accepted obligations toward the Huns that sounded less like charity to barbarians and more like terms between powers. To the Eastern court, payment purchased peace. To Attila and Bleda, payment confirmed rank. The treaty did not settle the relationship. It defined what the Hunnic kings could claim before demanding more. For several years, the brothers looked elsewhere. They campaigned against peoples beyond the Roman frontier and strengthened their authority. Constantinople had reasons to believe the arrangement was working. During the years of peace, Attila and Bleda did not become invisible beyond the river. Roman traders met Hunnic buyers at regulated markets. Envoys carried complaints in both directions. Captives sought ransom. Fugitives tried to disappear into frontier communities, while royal agents demanded names and return. A market on the Danube was never merely a place to exchange animals, cloth, wine, metal, and grain. It was a stage where equality could be argued. If Roman merchants were allowed favorable access, the empire could present the arrangement as proof of peaceful influence. If Hunnic officials controlled the location and terms, the kings demonstrated that Roman commerce depended upon their permission. Disputes over a stolen horse or escaped captive could become disputes over sovereignty, because each small case asked the same question: whose law followed a person across the river? Attila learned to turn individual cases into political pressure. Lists of fugitives appeared repeatedly in negotiation. Some were ordinary people fleeing servitude or punishment. Others were members of important families whose escape weakened the king. A Roman official might regard handing them back as cruel or inconvenient. Attila regarded refusal as a challenge to his authority over every other subject who might consider flight. The brothers also managed a court divided by personal attachments. Bleda appears in the sources less clearly than Attila, but not simply as a passive partner waiting to be removed. He maintained his own followers and household. The comic performer Zircon belonged for a time to Bleda and reportedly delighted him. When Zircon escaped and was later returned, Bleda received him with amusement and arranged a marriage for him. Attila did not share the enthusiasm. The small story survived because Priscus and later writers saw a contrast between the brothers, Bleda laughing openly, Attila withholding reaction. It would be unwise to build two complete personalities from one court anecdote, yet shared kingship always creates comparison. Every gift asks which ruler gave more. Every dispute asks whose judgment is final. Every foreign envoy studies the space between brothers. Attila and Bleda may have divided geographical responsibilities or acted together according to circumstance. The sources, written from outside, rarely show the daily machinery. Subject leaders could attach themselves more closely to one brother. Marriage ties, war bans, and control of tribute created networks that overlapped without becoming identical. This made co-rule useful. It also made it unstable. If one brother won greater prestige in war, followers might drift toward him. If Roman diplomats favored one, suspicion could grow. If succession opened within either household, every important man had to calculate which branch offered safety. For the moment, the brothers presented one front to Rome. Behind them stood not a nation waiting for commands, but a hierarchy of negotiated loyalties. Gothic kings, Gepid leaders, Hunnic nobles, and other chiefs retained authority over their own people while accepting the superior position of the royal family. They provided warriors and received access to plunder, gifts, pasture, and diplomatic protection. The structure could gather force quickly because it did not replace every local leader. It placed Attila and Bleda above them. Roman observers sometimes mistook flexibility for disorder. They looked for offices with fixed titles, archives, and provinces drawn on maps. The Hunnic Confederation used feasts, marriages, hostages, shared campaigns, and personal audience to perform similar work. A subject king who sat close to the ruler at dinner understood his standing. A man kept waiting outside understood his as well. Peace allowed this order to thicken. Roman gold entered it. Roman objects became rewards. Captured craftsmen built for elite households. Warriors who had fought under different names began to share a political future. Then Roman attention moved away from the Danube. The Huns noticed. In 441, the frontier opened like a door. The Eastern Roman Empire could not defend every frontier at once. Its armies watched Persia in the east. Its fleets and expeditionary forces became entangled in the western Mediterranean, where the Vandals had taken Carthage. Troops moved away from the Balkans. Garrisons remained, but the concentration of force that might have deterred Attila and Bleda was weakened. A dispute provided the pretext. The Bishop of Margus was accused of crossing the Danube and robbing Hunnic royal graves. Whether the charge was true is impossible to know. Graves, fugitives, unpaid obligations, and border markets all offered reasons for complaint. What mattered was that the brothers could present attack as punishment for Roman violation. Hunnic forces crossed the Danube in 441. The first blows fell on frontier cities that had endured earlier wars and still believed walls could separate settled life from the grasslands beyond. Viminatium was attacked. Margus itself fell after the accused bishop, according to one account, betrayed the city in an attempt to save himself. Singidunum, the site of modern Belgrade, was taken and damaged. Sirmium and other positions came under pressure. A frontier is rarely destroyed in one moment. It unravels through messages. A commander requests reinforcement and receives none. A town hears that the next town has fallen. Farmers move animals inside walls. Merchants delay journeys. Refugees arrive with incompatible stories. Officials insist the army is coming. Then riders appear on roads where no enemy should be. The Hunnic advance did not consist only of Huns. Subject people supplied infantry, cavalry, specialists, and local knowledge. Captured Roman equipment could be reused. Men familiar with siege work helped attack walls. The Confederation's power lay partly in its ability to gather different military traditions under one command. Constantinople negotiated a pause in 442 while troops were recalled from the Western expedition. The respite did not produce security. In 443, Attila and Bleda attacked again with greater force. Ratiaria, a major Roman military center on the Danube, fell. Nisus, birthplace of Constantine the Great and a strategic crossroads, was besieged. Hunnic forces used battering rams and mobile shelters against the defenses. When the city was taken, destruction was severe enough that years later Priscus would travel past ground still marked by ruins and bones. The road south opened. Serdica, Philippopolis, and Arcadiopolis were threatened or taken during the wider campaigns. Roman armies attempted to stop the advance and were defeated. Hunnic forces reached the approaches toward Constantinople, not necessarily because Attila expected to storm the capital, but because every mile closer increased the price of peace. The city itself stood behind the Theodosian walls, among the strongest fortifications in the world. A mounted confederation could devastate Thrace and still find those walls beyond easy reach. Attila did not need to take Constantinople to defeat its emperor. He needed the emperor to imagine what would happen if the countryside around the capital were destroyed again next year. The Eastern government accepted harsh terms. It paid thousands of pounds of gold in arrears and agreed to an annual tribute of 2,100 Roman pounds. Prisoners and fugitives were to be returned or ransomed at higher prices. The numbers recorded by Priscus and other sources represent extraordinary wealth, though ancient fiscal systems make exact modern comparison impossible. Gold left Constantinople in chests. It crossed roads Hunnic armies had ruined. At the royal center, it became politics. Attila and Bleda could reward followers, purchase luxury goods, employ craftsmen, strengthen alliances, and demonstrate that Roman emperors recognized their power. A successful campaign fed the next one. The richer the kings became, the more leaders had reason to join them. The larger the confederation grew, the more convincing the next threat became. Rome was not simply paying to avoid destruction. It was financing the system that made destruction possible. Yet the Eastern Empire remained more durable than its humiliation suggested. Taxes continued to be collected in provinces untouched by the raids. Constantinople's harbor remained crowded. Officials copied laws. Armies were rebuilt. The government could lose battles and still generate another negotiation, another payment, another defensive line. Attila's challenge was different. He had to keep winning. The brothers' shared rule ended around 445. Bleda died. The circumstances are uncertain. Later tradition accused Attila of murdering him during a hunt or arranging his death in another way. No surviving eyewitness explains what happened. Bleda may have died naturally, in conflict, or through a plot. The suspicion attached to Attila because the result served him perfectly. He became sole ruler. Any followers who had looked to Bleda now had to accept Attila, resist him, or flee. The transfer of power may have involved violence hidden from Roman observers. What is clear is that no rival brother remained to divide tribute, authority, or diplomatic attention. Attila's name now stood alone on Roman reports. His next opportunity came from the earth itself. Early in 447, a violent earthquake struck Constantinople. Houses cracked, churches and public buildings were damaged, and long stretches of the great land walls failed. Later chroniclers counted dozens of ruined towers. For a city whose security depended upon stone, the sound of masonry falling carried a political meaning as frightening as the destruction itself. Beyond the damaged line lay Thrace. Beyond Thrace lay Attila. News traveled in both directions. The imperial court knew that Hunnic forces could cross the Danube before a normal building program was complete. Attila's envoys and scouts did not need to see every breach to understand the opportunity. If the walls remained open, The capital that had resisted armies for generations might suddenly become vulnerable to a ruler whose strength depended upon arriving before an enemy was ready. The city answered with a race between labor and movement. The Praetorian prefect Constantine organized the repairs. Thousands of inhabitants were mobilized. The factions associated with the hippodrome, especially the blues and greens, supplied organized bodies of workers who usually competed through spectacle and street influence. Now they cleared fallen stone, carried earth, raised scaffolding, rebuilt towers, and restored the defensive line. Inscriptions later celebrated the speed of the work. For men hauling blocks beneath winter rain, Attila was not yet visible. His presence existed as urgency. Every repaired stretch shortened the opening through which the Huns might enter. Every delay widened it. The walls were restored before Attila could exploit the damage directly. Constantinople survived because a city often described through emperors and generals was defended by anonymous laborers lifting stone. The Balkans received no such protection. Attila crossed the Danube again. An Eastern Roman army under the general Arnagisclus met him near the river Eutus. The fighting appears to have been severe. Hunnic forces suffered losses, but the Roman commander was killed and his army defeated. The road through the provinces opened once more. This campaign differed from a single raid. It became a moving collapse of local security. Towns already weakened by earlier attacks faced another demand for food, ransom, or surrender. Estates were abandoned. Monasteries received refugees until they too lay within the path of war. Soldiers who survived one defeat gathered behind another line, while messengers carried instructions that arrived after the enemy had moved. The destruction reached deep into Thrace and toward Greece. Attila did not need to place ladders against Constantinople's repaired walls. He needed the people behind them to watch smoke rising from provinces the emperor claimed to protect. He demanded not only gold, but distance. The settlement that followed required the Romans to leave a broad zone south of the Danube empty of normal settlement. Ancient descriptions of its precise depth differ and may reflect the language of negotiation rather than a surveyor's map, but the principle was unmistakable. Imperial authority withdrew from land it still called Roman. For families ordered away, diplomacy became exile. A field could survive burning and be planted again. It could not be restored if treaty terms declared that no one should live there. Attila had transformed the frontier itself into tribute. The Emperor Theodosius II relied heavily on the powerful court official Chrysaphius, a eunuch whose influence made him admired by few and feared by many. Chrysaphius looked at the rising tribute, the devastated provinces, and the ruler beyond the Danube who treated imperial ambassadors as subordinates. The gold itself had become a political wound inside the empire. 2,100 Roman pounds of gold each year was not an abstract number. It had to be collected, counted, guarded, and carried. Imperial officials increased pressure on wealthy households and provincial communities already paying ordinary taxes. Landowners tried to shift burdens downward. Local officers searched for arrears. Coins and objects could be melted when ready bullion was scarce. In Constantinople, the payment might be discussed as a necessary expense of state. In a village recovering from raids, it could mean another demand after the harvest had failed. The tribute also offended elite pride. Roman political language assumed that emperors gave gifts to lesser rulers. Attila insisted upon payment under treaty and punished delay. The same chest could therefore be described in Constantinople as a subsidy and in the Hunnic court as proof of submission. The dispute was not about vocabulary alone. Each description told soldiers and taxpayers who had won. The return of fugitives carried an even darker cost. Men who had escaped Hunnic power were brought before Roman officials and handed back. Some had served the Huns and deserted. Some belonged to subject elites. Others may have been captives who reached imperial ground and believed themselves safe. Treaty obligation erased the refuge. Attila sometimes demanded execution rather than return for particular enemies. A ruler who allowed defectors to prosper invited more defection. Public punishment repaired the warning. Roman diplomats could object, delay, conceal, or claim a man could not be found, but every missing name gave Attila another grievance. The border thus filled with people whose individual choices had become matters between empires. A captive taken at Nisus might learn a new language, marry, and never return. A Hunnic noble fleeing a family dispute might offer military information to Rome. A Roman craftsman could build a bathhouse for Onegesius. A secretary educated in imperial schools could write Attila's letters against the emperor who had trained him. The categories of Roman and Hun were crossed every day by survival. This movement strengthened Attila and frightened Chrysaphius. The king did not stand outside the imperial system waiting to be repelled. He drew people, skills, and wealth out of it. Every payment increased his ability to demand the next. Every failed attempt to protect fugitives showed that imperial law stopped where his insistence began. Open war had not solved the problem. The walls of Constantinople could keep Attila out, but they could not rebuild the Balkans between campaigns. Armies could wound Hunnic forces and still lose the field. Negotiation could purchase time and make the next demand larger. Chrysaphius chose the solution of a court where enemies often disappeared through intrigue. He decided that war and negotiation were not enough. Attila should be killed. The plan appeared clever inside the palace. It would become humiliating at Attila's court, and one man traveling with the embassy would record what happened. The assassination plan depended upon a man named Eudico. He belonged to Attila's inner circle and had recently traveled to Constantinople as part of a Hunnic embassy. Chrysaphius and a Roman interpreter named Bigilus approached him in secret. They offered wealth if he would arrange the king's death. Eudico appeared to agree. The conspirators needed a reason to send money and agents into Hunnic territory. An official embassy was prepared under a respectable senior diplomat named Maximinus. Priscus joined the mission, apparently without knowing at first that its stated purpose concealed murder. Bigilus traveled with them. He believed himself the bridge between palace and assassin. Eudico had already told Attila everything. The embassy left Constantinople and moved through a landscape that revealed the price of previous campaigns. Roads passed ruined towns. At Nisus, the travelers saw remains of the dead and buildings left broken years after the attack. Rivers had to be crossed by boats cut from single tree trunks. Villages offered food, shelter, horses, and guides under the authority of Hunnic officials. Priscus observed rather than merely condemned. At one settlement, local women received the envoys with food and a traditional gesture of hospitality. A storm flooded their camp, and inhabitants rescued baggage from darkness and water. The journey moved through communities whose lives did not match the Roman image of endless mounted savagery. There were farmers, servants, craftsmen, noble households, subject peoples, and captives who had adapted to a new world. One encounter became especially revealing. Priscus met a man dressed in Hunnic fashion who greeted him in Greek. The stranger had once been a merchant from the Roman city of Viminatium. He had been captured when the Huns took the city and assigned his property to Onegesius, one of Attila's most powerful men. After fighting bravely in later campaigns, he gained freedom, married, and entered Hunnic society. To Priscus's surprise, the former captive argued that life among the Huns was better than life under Roman government. He praised the rewards of courage and complained that Roman laws protected the wealthy, delayed justice, and crushed ordinary people with taxes. Priscus defended the empire, its written law, and its ordered institutions. Their conversation, shaped by the historian's literary purpose, may not preserve every word exactly. Yet it shows that Roman identity was no simple prison from which everyone outside wished to be rescued. The empire still called itself civilization. Some people living beyond its frontier had reasons to disagree. The conversation with the Greek-speaking former captive deserves to remain with us for a moment, because it placed two political worlds across from one another without an army between them. Priscus saw a man who looked, at first glance, like one of Attila's followers. His clothing, hair, and manner belonged to the society around the Hunnic court. Then the stranger addressed him in Greek. He had once traded in Viminatium, had been captured when the city fell, and had passed into the household of Onagesius. By his own account, courage and later fighting earned him freedom. He married, established a household, and acquired enough security to speak as someone who had made a life rather than merely survive captivity. Priscus expected gratitude for Roman civilization. The man instead described its burdens. He spoke of long lawsuits, officials who favored the rich, taxes collected without mercy, and a system in which an ordinary person might possess legal rights on parchment, yet lack the money or influence required to use them. Among the Huns, he argued, a man who fought successfully could receive a direct reward and enjoy what he had gained without the same maze of offices. Priscus defended Roman law. Written rules, he answered, were preferable to judgment depending upon one powerful man. The empire trained officials, protected inheritance, distinguished free people from slaves, and offered forms of appeal unknown in a court held together by personal favor. Roman order could be abused, but abuse did not erase the value of law itself. The exchange was shaped by Priscus as a writer and may have been polished into a formal debate after the journey. Even so, he chose to preserve the captive's criticism rather than silence it. That choice matters. A Roman diplomat had crossed ruined provinces expecting to meet people oppressed by a barbarian king. He found at least one former Roman who believed the empire's injustice had made freedom beyond the frontier preferable. Attila did not need every captive to love him. He needed enough people to discover that a place inside his order was possible. As the embassy approached Attila's center, the political atmosphere tightened. Attila already knew why Bigilus had come. Instead of immediately exposing the plot, he controlled the pace. The Romans were made to wait, move, deliver messages, and experience uncertainty. Bigilus was questioned about fugitives and treaty obligations. Attila accused him of shamelessness. The interpreter's confidence began to collapse. When Bigilus was later sent back toward Roman territory, he carried instructions to return with money, supposedly to ransom captives. He did not understand that Attila was allowing the conspiracy to continue until the evidence could be seized. The court itself stood on the broad plain in a settlement of wooden buildings. Roman imagination expected a tent city or disorderly camp. Priscus saw a royal compound with halls, enclosures, carved timber, towers, and residences belonging to important families. Onagesius possessed a bathhouse constructed by a Roman captive using stone transported from elsewhere. Attila's principal wife, Creca, received visitors in her own quarters and commanded a substantial household. Women sat working decorative cloth. Servants moved through courtyards. Nobles arrived with petitions. Foreign envoys waited for access. Languages crossed in the air: Hunnic, Gothic, Latin, Greek, and others spoken by the many peoples gathered around the king. The place had no marble forum. It was still a capital. Its order could also be seen inside the households of elite women. Priscus was received by Creca, Attila's principal wife and the mother of important sons. She sat within a wooden residence decorated more carefully than the simple material might suggest. Women around her worked colored threads into cloth. Servants managed gifts and visitors. The scene was domestic, but not politically unimportant. An ambassador who entered Creca's household was entering part of the network surrounding succession and royal favor. Marriage connected the confederation. A wife could bring relatives into closer alliance with the ruling family. Her household could support clients, arrange hospitality, and preserve the position of her children. Widows might retain land, followers, and influence. The widow of Bleda controlled a settlement through which the Roman embassy passed. Attila's death would later expose how much the future depended upon the sons born within these different households. Priscus also described the wife of Onagesius sending food and wine to Attila during a journey. The king accepted the hospitality in a ceremonial manner, eating while seated on horseback or beneath a temporary arrangement rather than entering as an ordinary guest. The exchange acknowledged both the woman's rank and the king's supremacy. Such details matter because Roman authors often represented steppe society as almost entirely male, mounted, and violent. No army could exist that way. Behind campaigns stood people breeding horses, tending herds, preparing leather, weaving clothing, preserving food, raising children, managing captives, and maintaining the relationships that allowed thousands of warriors to gather. Women's labor and household authority did not appear in battle lists, but the Confederation depended upon them. The royal center joined these households without absorbing them completely. A noble family's residence could be dismantled, rebuilt, or moved according to political and seasonal needs. Wealth existed in animals, metal, textiles, people, and access rather than only in land or stone. Roman envoys who saw wooden walls sometimes mistook material difference for simplicity. The carved beams, imported goods, bathhouse, decorated fabrics, and organized reception of guests showed a court spending wealth according to its own priorities. Attila's refusal of ornament therefore became even more deliberate. He sat amid a society capable of luxury and chose not to display it on his own body. Its institutions were people. Onagesius served as advisor, negotiator, judge, and political manager. Secretaries trained in Roman literacy handled written communications. Subject kings attended Attila. Ambassadors from both halves of the empire sought answers. Families of the elite built alliances through marriage and hospitality. Authority moved through the court even when the court itself could move across the landscape. Priscus saw Attila in public procession. People approached with disputes. The king heard cases and gave judgments. Those nearby watched not only the outcome, but the manner in which it was delivered. Justice at such a court reinforced hierarchy. Every petitioner acknowledged that Attila stood above competing loyalties. The Roman embassy presented Emperor Theodosius's letter. Maximinus offered formal greetings and wishes for Attila's health. Attila replied with cold precision that the Romans would receive what they wished for him. The threat required no raised voice. He then turned upon Bigilus. Why had he come when Rome had not returned all the fugitives demanded under treaty? Why did he appear again after earlier failures? Attila knew enough to make the interpreter understand that something had gone terribly wrong, but not enough was said to reveal every detail before the trap closed. Diplomacy became theater. The Romans represented an emperor who claimed universal majesty. Yet they stood in Attila's hall while he dictated the emotional temperature. He could refuse gifts, delay answers, demand names, and remind them that their government had tried to kill him under the protection of an embassy. The plot had given him a victory more useful than an assassination attempt defeated in silence. It allowed him to expose imperial dishonor. When Bigilus returned carrying the promised gold, Hunnic agents searched him and found the money. He could no longer pretend that it was ordinary diplomatic expense. Attila sent representatives to Constantinople with the evidence and a message aimed directly at Theodosius. The emperor had inherited his station from a noble father. Attila, the message implied, had preserved his own rank nobly. Theodosius had become Attila's slave by paying tribute and had behaved like a dishonest slave by plotting against his master. No Roman emperor could hear those words without humiliation. The Eastern court paid more to settle the danger. Chrysafius survived for the moment, protected by palace politics. Attila gained prestige among his followers and proof that even the emperor feared him enough to attempt murder. Priscus, meanwhile, remained long enough to attend a royal feast. It is there that Attila steps out of political rumor and becomes a man seated beneath a roof, surrounded by family, warriors, poets, servants, and enemies. The guests entered according to rank. Cups were raised. Songs began. And at the center, the richest ruler beyond the Danube chose to eat from wood. At Attila's feast, rank determined distance from the king. Guests reclined or sat along the walls. Important men occupied places close to Attila. Lesser figures sat farther away. Servants entered carrying food and drink. Roman envoys received meat on silver plates and wine in silver or gold cups. Hunnic nobles displayed decorated weapons, bridles, clothing, and ornaments. Attila's own meal was simple. His meat was served on a wooden plate. His cup was wooden. His clothing was clean but undecorated. The sword at his side, the straps of his sandals, and the equipment of his horse lacked the precious stones and gold favored by those around him. Priscus noticed because he was meant to notice. The simplicity was not poverty. Attila controlled more Roman gold than any other Hunnic ruler had received. He could have covered himself in jewels. By refusing display while allowing his followers to enjoy it, he made a claim about the source of power. They needed gold to show what they had gained from serving him. He needed only himself. The performance also answered Roman prejudice. An emperor in Constantinople appeared through layers of silk, jewels, eunuchs, guards, ritual, and architecture. Attila sat among men whose wealth depended upon him and showed that his authority required no borrowed light. After each course, a servant filled the king's cup. Attila raised it to honor a guest, drank a small amount, and returned it. The gesture moved through the hall with careful order. Even celebration followed hierarchy. Poets or singers came forward and recited songs of Hunnic victories and warrior courage. Older men listened with pleasure. Some guests wept as memory and age met in the performance. These songs have not survived. They may have carried versions of Hunnic history that vanished when the political world supporting them disappeared. A comic performer named Zircon later entered. He was a man of African origin, described by the sources as a dwarf, who had passed through different owners and courts. His appearance, speech, and confusion of languages entertained the nobles. Everyone laughed. Attila did not. Priscus emphasized the king's control. No joke moved his face. No luxury distracted him. He remained still while the hall responded around him. Only when his youngest son entered did his expression soften. The boy was named Ernak. Attila looked at him with affection and touched his face. Someone explained to Priscus that diviners had predicted decline for Attila's wider family, but renewal through this child. Whether the prophecy was real, misunderstood, or added to give meaning to later events, the moment reveals what imperial power could not remove. Attila had sons. He had to imagine a future after himself. His elder sons, including Elik and Dingizic, already occupied positions within the dynasty. They would inherit warriors, expectations, rivalries, and claims. Yet no rule of succession could guarantee that men who obeyed one father would obey several sons. Attila's household was large. He had multiple wives, as elite marriage linked families and extended political ties. Prisca, mother of important sons, appears in Priscus's account with dignity and authority. The widow of Bleda also retained status and controlled a village that hosted Roman travelers. The death of one ruler did not erase the women and dependents attached to his branch of the dynasty. The court lived for more than plunder. Herding remained essential. Subject communities farmed. Markets linked the Hunnic world to Roman frontiers. Tribute arrived in gold, but goods moved in both directions. Roman merchants entered negotiated markets. Captives supplied labor and specialized skills. Elite demands supported craft production in metal, wood, leather, textiles, and horse equipment. Archaeology reveals a world of mixed styles rather than a single Hunnic uniform. Cauldrons, weapons, jewelry, mirrors, decorated fittings, modified skulls, and burial customs appear in different combinations across regions. Objects could express rank, mobility, marriage, imitation, or political belonging. The empire was visible not through monuments, but through patterns spreading among people. Attila held those patterns together by controlling access to Roman wealth and military success. His claim to authority also gathered legend. A story preserved by Priscus and later writers told of a shepherd who saw one of his cattle limping. Following drops of blood, he found an ancient sword protruding from the ground and brought it to Attila. The king accepted it as the sacred weapon of the war god, proof that dominion over the world had been granted to him. Roman readers associated it with Mars. The exact belief behind the story is difficult to recover. Attila may have encouraged the discovery, or courtiers may have interpreted it for Roman audiences. A sword from the earth was useful because it turned conquest into destiny. Tribute became not merely payment to a strong neighbor, but submission to a ruler chosen by divine power. Attila could be practical and prophetic at the same time. He calculated arrears in pounds of gold. He also allowed men to believe the earth had delivered him a sword. The court that Priscus observed also explains why calling Attila merely a nomad can mislead. Mobility did not prevent political concentration. The royal settlement could remain in one region long enough for substantial wooden halls, enclosures, workshops, and elite residences to be built. It could receive foreign delegations according to schedule and support households numbering in the hundreds. Yet its power did not depend upon a single stone city that an enemy could capture and declare the empire ended. If danger or pasture required movement, people and authority could move. Messengers rode between subject rulers. Marriage connected families across distance. Annual gatherings, feasts, and campaigns renewed personal bonds. Important men came to the king because access to him determined access to gold, justice, and military opportunity. The center was wherever Attila sat. This flexibility gave him protection unavailable to a Roman emperor. Theodosius could not abandon Constantinople without creating a political crisis. The city contained court, treasury, archives, senate, churches, and the ceremonial center of legitimacy. Attila's legitimacy traveled with his household and followers. The same flexibility created limits. Orders moving through personal relationships could be obeyed quickly when the ruler was feared. They could also be reinterpreted by distant leaders. A subject king maintained his own warriors and interests. Attila had to watch who married whom, which brother received more gifts, which Roman envoy spoke privately to which noble, and which defeated people might revolt if another campaign went badly. His apparent stillness at the feast concealed continuous management. The plain clothing, controlled face, and measured toasts told everyone that the king remained above rivalry. Even affection toward Ernak was political because observers immediately asked what it meant for succession. No gesture from a ruler with several sons remained entirely private. The court's cultural mixture helped Attila govern. Gothic was likely a common language among many followers. Latin served diplomacy in the West. Greek-speaking captives and secretaries connected the court to Constantinople. Interpreters could rise in importance because a mistranslated demand might cause war. Roman defectors brought knowledge of roads, fortifications, offices, and personalities. Attila did not need to become Roman. He needed to know what Romans valued and feared. He knew that imperial officials hated public humiliation, that court factions concealed private schemes, that frontier commanders could not act without resources, and that emperors sometimes preferred an expensive peace to an uncertain victory. He also understood that Roman gifts carried titles and recognition, not only material value. The Hunnic king who received a Roman office did not become an obedient official merely because the court described him that way. He gained another symbol to distribute. The embassy of 449 departed with the conspiracy exposed and the king's prestige strengthened. Priscus returned to an empire that had survived humiliation by paying for peace. Then, in 450, Emperor Theodosius II died after a riding accident. The political balance changed immediately. The new Eastern Emperor, Marcian, was an experienced soldier who married Theodosius's sister Pulcheria to secure legitimacy. He refused to continue the tribute. According to a saying attributed to him, he had gold for friends and iron for enemies. Attila threatened retaliation, but the Eastern Empire was no longer as vulnerable as it had been. Its armies had recovered. The walls of Constantinople were sound. Marcian's government showed less fear of renewed war, and Attila had another opportunity in the west. A message had crossed the frontier from the imperial family of Ravenna. It came from Honoria, sister of the Western Emperor Valentinian III. She had been given the title Augusta and belonged to the dynasty that connected both halves of the Roman world. She also lived under strict control because her marriage could create a rival claimant to the throne. Honoria had become involved with a man in her household, often identified as Eugenius. The affair was discovered. He was executed, and Honoria was promised to a senator chosen because he was unlikely to threaten her brother. She resisted. In 450, she sent a trusted servant to Attila carrying a message and a ring. The surviving accounts do not allow us to know exactly what she intended. She may have asked for rescue rather than marriage. Attila chose the interpretation most useful to him. He announced that Honoria had offered herself as his bride. Then he demanded her. With her, he demanded a dowry worthy of an imperial princess. He claimed a share of the Western Roman Empire. The request was impossible. That was why it was valuable. If Valentinian accepted, Attila entered Roman dynastic politics with a legal claim unlike any raid could provide. If Valentinian refused, Attila possessed a public grievance and a reason to invade. Honoria was punished and kept from him. Attila prepared to move west. Attila did not invade Gaul for Honoria alone. The princess gave him language for a larger decision. Western weakness, Frankish succession disputes, old relationships with Gothic and Roman leaders, the end of Eastern tribute, and the need to keep followers supplied with victory all pointed in the same direction. An empire built upon distribution could not remain still for long. Every year without Roman gold increased pressure within the Confederation. Subject kings expected rewards. Warriors expected opportunity. Important families watched one another. Attila's authority was immense because he appeared to control the future. A failed campaign would not simply cost men. It could make obedience less profitable. Gaul offered cities, captives, prestige, and political leverage. It also offered Aetius. The two men had never been simple opposites. Aetius had relied on Hunnic forces in Western civil wars and campaigns. Attila's uncles had supported him. Hunnic power had helped Aetius destroy a Burgundian kingdom near the Rhine in the 430s, an event later transformed in Germanic legend. Roman and Hunnic interests had overlapped often enough that each side understood the other's methods. Now the relationship turned. Aetius served Emperor Valentinian III, but his own authority rested on military reputation and the alliances he could assemble. The Western government had too few dependable imperial troops to stop Attila alone. North Africa's revenues were lost to the Vandals. Spain was divided among competing powers. Britain had long been abandoned. Gaul contained Roman landowners, cities, bishops, local forces, Franks, Burgundians, Alans, and Visigoths whose loyalty to Ravenna varied with circumstance. Attila may have expected those divisions to work for him. Some groups were already tied to Hunnic power. Others had reasons to resent Aetius. The Visigoths under King Theodoric I had fought Rome repeatedly and ruled from Toulouse with considerable independence. The Alans around Orleans occupied a strategic position and had an uncertain relationship with surrounding powers. Frankish factions may have sought outside support in a dispute over succession. Attila's diplomatic world extended into Gaul before his army did. Early in 451, his forces crossed the Rhine. The exact route is uncertain. The army was not one uniform mass, but a great collection of contingents moving along several roads, gathering again around important objectives. Hunnic mounted archers rode beside subject Gepids, Ostrogoths, Rugians, Syrians, and others. Kings who governed their own peoples marched beneath Attila's command. Roman sources inflated numbers into hundreds of thousands. The real army was smaller, but still large enough to create a logistical shadow across the land. Horses stripped pasture. Wagons slowed roads. Foragers spread outward. Communities fled before direct contact because feeding the invaders could be nearly as destructive as fighting them. Cities along the route faced different fates. A walled city did not choose between simple courage and cowardice. Its council had to estimate food, defenders, the condition of gates, the willingness of neighboring forces to help, and what surrender might cost. Bishops often became negotiators because they remained visible representatives of communities when imperial officials fled or lacked authority. Wealthy families could pay for protection, hide valuables, or leave early. Poor inhabitants had fewer choices. Attila benefited from uncertainty. If one city resisted and was destroyed, the next might open its gates. If another paid and survived, rumors of the price traveled. Terror reduced the number of sieges required. The most efficient devastation was the one people imagined before it arrived. Christian tradition later filled the route with holy confrontations. Bishop Lupus of Troyes was said to have gone out to meet Attila and secured protection for his city. Genevieve of Paris urged residents not to abandon their homes, and Paris escaped the main attack. The surviving stories were written and shaped through devotion, so they cannot be read as simple campaign reports. They show how local memory transformed political survival into evidence of sanctity. For a family inside the threatened zone, strategy appeared as waiting. Hooves might be heard beyond walls. Smoke on the horizon could mean an estate burning or only a field cleared by defenders. A messenger might announce that Attila had turned away, then another insist he was approaching from a different road. Churches filled. Storehouses were counted. People buried coins and objects they might never recover. The Hunnic army also lived inside uncertainty. Its commanders needed intelligence about bridges, river levels, pasture, and the movement of Aetius. Subject contingents could not be allowed to scatter too widely. Plunder had to be shared without provoking conflict. Captives slowed movement, but represented wealth. Every siege gave the Roman coalition more time to gather. Attila could not simply burn everything in his path. He needed roads usable, animals fed, and enough order to reach the political objective of the campaign. Violence was selective in method even when catastrophic in result. Metz was taken and burned after resistance. Other places paid, opened gates, or escaped major assault. Reims suffered. Tales later grew around saints and bishops who saved their communities, were martyred, or confronted the invader. Some preserve memories of real local encounters. Others reveal how Christian communities explained survival and destruction after the army had passed. Attila's campaign moved toward the Loire. Aurelianum, modern Orleans, stood at a crossing of great strategic importance. The Alans under their king Sangiban occupied the area. Later sources accused Sangiban of planning to surrender the city to Attila, though the truth is uncertain. Aetius could not afford to lose the crossing or allow Attila to divide the forces gathering against him. The Roman general had spent years negotiating among enemies. Now he attempted his greatest coalition. He persuaded Theodoric and the Visigoths to join him. The Goths did not come because they suddenly trusted Rome. They came because Attila's victory threatened their own kingdom. Franks, Burgundians, Alans, and other forces joined in varying numbers. The army assembled by Aetius was Roman in leadership and purpose, but depended heavily on peoples once described as barbarians. That was not evidence that Rome had already vanished. It was evidence of what Rome had become. Imperial power still possessed the prestige to organize rivals around a common danger. Aetius' genius lay less in commanding a pure Roman army than in persuading men who disliked one another that they would lose more if they stayed apart. The coalition did not gather in one clean moment. Messengers rode between men who had spent years distrusting one another. Aetius needed the Visigoths, but Theodoric had no reason to sacrifice his kingdom merely to preserve imperial pride. The Visigothic court had its own memory of Roman promises, betrayals, settlements, and war. Its nobles could reasonably ask whether Attila threatened to lose more than Rome threatened it after the crisis passed. Aetius therefore argued from survival, not obedience. If Attila controlled central Gaul, the Visigothic kingdom would be isolated. If Orleans and the Loire crossings fell, Hunnic forces could choose their next enemy, while every Western power remained separated. Theodoric did not have to trust Ravenna. He had to understand that no treaty with Attila would remain secure once the coalition against him had been broken. The Alans around Orleans presented another uncertainty. Later sources suspected their king Sangiban of considering surrender. Whether he truly negotiated with Attila or merely became the target of allied suspicion, Aetius could not place the fate of the crossing upon confidence alone. The Alans would eventually stand in the most exposed part of the battle line, where their movement could be watched by both Roman and Visigothic forces. Every decision contained another decision beneath it. Aetius was assembling an army and arranging what its members would be able to do after victory. Theodoric was defending Gaul and protecting the future independence of his own people. Frankish and Burgundian leaders measured local rivals while answering a wider threat. Bishops and city officials supplied information because the disappearance of imperial administration had made local networks essential. Attila faced the same problem from the opposite side. His army also contained kings with their own ambitions. Ostrogoths, Gepids, Huns, and other contingents obeyed him because his victories made that obedience valuable. A long siege at Orleans gave them time to count losses and imagine alternatives. The two armies approaching one another were therefore not Rome and the Huns in simple form. They were two temporary answers to the same late Roman world, each held together by one man's ability to prevent allies from becoming rivals before the battle was finished. The coalition approached Orleans while Attila's siege was still underway. Sources disagree about the precise timing. In some accounts, Hunnic forces had entered part of the city before withdrawing. In others, the approach of Aetius and Theodoric forced Attila to abandon the operation before success. What matters is that Orleans did not become the easy political victory Attila needed. He turned east. The retreat was orderly enough to preserve his army and deliberate enough to seek ground for battle. Aetius followed. Neither commander could allow the campaign to end without testing the coalition. Attila needed to break the alliance before it hardened into a new balance of power. Aetius needed to prove that the Western Empire could still stop an invasion. They moved toward the broad country of northeastern Gaul. The place of the battle is not known with certainty. Ancient sources call it the Catalaunian or Mauriac Plain. Modern tradition places it somewhere in the Champagne region, near Chalons or Troyes. The exact field has resisted identification. The uncertainty suits the battle. Almost everything about it is contested. The numbers, formations, sequence, casualties, and final result. One later writer, Jordanes, provides the fullest narrative, drawing partly upon earlier material now lost, but shaping it through Gothic memory. Contemporary chronicles are briefer. All agree that the fighting was immense. Before the main battle, Franks and Gepids clashed in darkness with heavy loss. Then the larger armies arranged themselves. Attila placed his Huns in the center. Subject Ostrogoths and other peoples held the wings. Aetius and his Roman forces occupied one part of the allied line. Theodoric's Visigoths stood opposite Goths who served Attila. Alans held the center, perhaps because Aetius trusted them least, or because their position made tactical sense. A ridge or area of high ground became crucial. Both sides moved to seize it. The contest began before every formation was ready. Attila had spent years choosing when Rome would feel fear. On this day, he could not control every movement. The battle opened with dust rising beneath thousands of feet and hooves, with men speaking several languages and banners marking loyalties that had changed more than once within a lifetime. Somewhere on that field stood Aetius, who had once called Huns to save his career. Somewhere opposite stood Attila, who had turned Roman gold into an army. The ancient world they knew had gathered its fragments into two lines. By nightfall, neither would be the same. The battle spread across uneven ground. Mounted archers released arrows into advancing formations. Heavy cavalry sought openings. Infantry tried to keep shields aligned while dust narrowed vision. Orders given in Latin, Gothic, and other languages traveled unevenly along lines too large for any commander to see at once. The high ground mattered because elevation offered momentum, visibility, and control. Forces associated with Aetius' coalition gained the ridge before Attila's men could secure it. The Hunnic king found himself attacking uphill or fighting from a less favorable position. Then the battle lost its shape. The Visigoths drove into the Ostrogoths, men of related traditions now serving opposite rulers. Theodoric, the elderly Visigothic king, was killed. Jordanes offered more than one possibility. He may have fallen from his horse and been trampled by his own men, or he may have been struck by a spear. In the confusion, his body disappeared beneath the fighting. His death could have broken the Visigoths. Instead, it gave the struggle a new fury. Theodoric's son Thorismund continued the attack. At some point, he was separated from his own men and wandered into danger near the Hunnic position before escaping. Aetius himself may also have become disoriented after dark and spent part of the night among Gothic allies because he could not find the Roman camp. These details, if preserved accurately, reveal the battle more clearly than impossible casualty numbers. No one controlled it. Attila's forces were pressed back toward their wagon enclosure. The wagons formed a defensive ring, a movable wall behind which archers could continue shooting and wounded men could gather. The Huns had not collapsed, but the field outside was no longer theirs. A later account says Attila ordered a great heap of saddles prepared as a funeral pyre. If the enclosure were breached, he intended to burn himself rather than be captured and displayed as a Roman prize. The scene may have been shaped for drama. It also fits the danger of the night. The king who had dictated terms to emperors waited inside a shrinking defensive space while enemies gathered beyond wagons. The songs of victory heard by Priscus 2 years earlier could have ended there. The final assault did not come. Morning revealed a battlefield covered with the dead and two coalitions still uncertain of one another. The Visigoths found Theodoric's body and mourned him. Thorismund was raised as king by his people. Then Aetius advised him to return quickly to Toulouse. The reason given by Jordanes was political. If Thorismund remained in Gaul, his brothers might seize the throne. That danger was real. A newly chosen king could not ignore succession at home. Yet the departure also benefited Aetius. A completely destroyed Hunnic power might leave the Visigoths as the strongest force in Gaul. The Western general had spent his career balancing threats. Attila weakened could still serve as a counterweight. Theodoric's victorious sons, with no Hunnic enemy remaining, might turn their attention toward Roman territory. Whether Aetius deliberately allowed Attila to escape remains debated. He may simply have lacked the strength to storm the wagon camp. His coalition had suffered heavily. The Visigoths had lost their king. Allied forces had joined for one campaign, not for permanent obedience. Pursuit against a still dangerous mounted army could turn victory into disaster. Attila withdrew. The Battle of the Catalaunian Plains has often been described as one of the decisive battles of world history, the day Roman and Christian civilization stopped an Asiatic conqueror from overrunning the West. That interpretation belongs more to later anxieties than to the uncertain result of 451. Attila was stopped in Gaul. He was not destroyed. Aetius preserved the Western coalition long enough to remove the immediate threat, but he did not restore Roman control over lost provinces. The Visigoths remained independent. The Franks continued rising. The Western government remained poor. The Hunnic Confederation still obeyed Attila. The battle's importance lies partly in what it revealed. Rome could no longer meet its greatest enemy with Roman forces alone. Attila could no longer assume that Rome's divisions would always remain divided. Both men left the field with their central power intact and their limits exposed. For Attila, withdrawal created a political danger. Followers who had expected plunder had suffered losses. Subject kings had watched the Hunnic center pushed back. An empire built on the appearance of unstoppable success could not rest for long after a campaign that looked like defeat. He needed another target. Italy lay across the Alps. The peninsula possessed wealth, symbolic power, and cities that had not seen an invading army like his. The Western imperial court at Ravenna could not rely automatically on the Visigoths who had fought in Gaul. Aetius' coalition had been assembled for one emergency and had dispersed. Honoria's unresolved claim remained available. Attila again demanded the princess and the share of empire he called her dowry. Valentinian refused. The Hunnic king could present the next invasion as enforcement of a lawful marriage claim, punishment for insult, or continuation of war. Behind every justification stood the need to reassert momentum. In the spring of 452, the Huns crossed the Julian Alps and entered northern Italy. Aquileia blocked the road. The city's resistance surprised them. Its walls held long enough for uncertainty to spread through Attila's army. Supplies had to be gathered. Horses needed pasture. Summer approached. A siege consumed time that mounted warfare usually saved. Then Aquileia fell. The fall mattered beyond the value of one city. Aquileia guarded the northern approaches to Italy. Roman armies had used it as a base for centuries. Emperors had passed through it. Merchants connected the Adriatic with roads toward the Danube. If such a place could be broken, smaller communities could not assume that geography or imperial reputation would protect them. The capture also demonstrated that Attila's coalition had learned more than mobile war. A great stone city required siegecraft. Earthworks had to approach walls. Rams, towers, ladders, or mining required timber, tools, labor, and men willing to work beneath missiles from above. Subject peoples and captives brought different skills. Roman military knowledge did not remain Roman once soldiers deserted, engineers were captured, and machines were studied after battle. The Hunnic army could therefore change its shape. On open ground, mounted forces created fear through speed. Before walls, the Confederation gathered slower forms of expertise. Attila's power lay in making those different elements serve one campaign. Victory produced a new logistical problem. A captured city contained food and wealth, but also fire, wounded men, captives, damaged streets, and soldiers searching for personal plunder. Leaders had to restore enough order for the march to continue. Valuable metal, cloth, animals, and people were separated from what could not be carried. News spread faster than the wagons. The destruction became so complete in later memory that writers claimed the city's location could scarcely be recognized. Archaeology and later recovery show that life did not vanish forever, but the shock was profound. Refugees moved toward the lagoons and safer settlements along the Adriatic coast. The old story that Attila's invasion founded Venice is too simple. Communities already lived among the islands, marshes, and channels. Yet repeated insecurity on the mainland, including the Hunnic attack, encouraged movement toward places difficult for cavalry and armies to reach. Over time, the waters that appeared marginal became protection. Attila advanced through the Po Valley. Cities such as Padua, Vicenza, Verona, Brescia, and Bergamo faced attack, surrender, or abandonment in the wider campaign. Milan was occupied. One later anecdote says Attila entered an imperial palace and saw a painting of Roman emperors seated above defeated Scythians. He ordered a new image made showing himself enthroned while Roman emperors poured gold at his feet. The story may be too perfect. It survived because it expressed the relationship he had created. Rome still painted itself victorious. Rome had paid him. As the army moved west and south, the question returned. Would Attila march on Rome itself? Aetius could not assemble the coalition of the previous year. He harassed where possible, but lacked a field army capable of forcing another great battle. Valentinian remained protected at Ravenna or moved within Italy under the shadow of danger. Senators, bishops, and officials searched for another answer. They chose an embassy. Among its members was Leo, Bishop of Rome. The king who had not been defeated in Italy would meet a man without an army. Leo was not yet the medieval pope imagined by later centuries. The Bishop of Rome possessed prestige because his church was associated with the apostles Peter and Paul, and because Rome remained the symbolic center of the Western world. Leo had already demonstrated political courage. In 449, he had opposed a controversial church council at Ephesus. In 451, his theological teaching helped shape the Council of Chalcedon. He understood authority, ceremony, and the power of words. But he did not command the armies of the West. The embassy also included senior imperial officials, commonly identified as the Senator Gennadius Avienus and the former Praetorian prefect Trigetius. This was not simply a priest walking alone into a barbarian camp. It was a formal delegation carrying the remaining dignity and negotiating power of the Western state. They met Attila somewhere in northern Italy, probably near the river Mincio, though the precise location is uncertain. No transcript survives. That absence created space for miracle. Later Christian art showed Leo standing calm before the Hunnic king, while the apostles Peter and Paul appeared in the sky or hovered behind him with swords. Attila, who feared no Roman army, supposedly saw heavenly guardians and withdrew. The image became more important than the unknown conversation. It offered a new model of power at a moment when imperial protection was failing. Rome could be saved by sacred authority when soldiers could not save it. The bishop appeared as defender not only of souls, but of city and civilization. Historical explanation is less simple. Attila's army had spent months in a region already strained by poor harvests. Thousands of horses and men required food every day. The Po Valley was rich, but wealth on a map does not guarantee supplies after cities close gates. Harvests fail, local people flee, and foraging parties consume the nearest resources. Disease may have spread through the army. Ancient writers associated the campaign with famine and sickness. Summer heat, contaminated water, crowded camps, wounded men, and unfamiliar conditions could damage an army without producing one decisive moment. Hunnic mobility depended upon healthy horses. A force that could move quickly across open country became vulnerable when animals weakened. There was danger behind Attila as well. Emperor Marcian's eastern forces crossed the Danube or attacked Hunnic positions while the main army was in Italy. Details are limited, but the threat mattered. The Confederation's center contained families, herds, subject peoples, and rivals who might test authority during prolonged absence. Attila also knew the story of Alaric. The Gothic king had sacked Rome in 410 and died soon afterward. According to one tradition, men around Attila warned that taking the city might bring the same fate. Such reasoning need not appear rational to matter. Kings who used prophecy to support power could also listen when prophecy advised caution. Rome itself was not defenseless in the same way as an open town. Its walls were formidable. A siege would demand time, equipment, and supplies. Taking the city might produce prestige and plunder, but it would not solve the army's need for food or the threat to Hunnic territory. Diplomacy could turn withdrawal into success. If the Western delegation offered payment, promises, renewed discussion of Honoria, or recognition of Attila's claims, he could leave without admitting failure. The meeting allowed both sides to describe the outcome as chosen. Leo could return as the man who saved Rome. Attila could return as the king who had forced Rome's greatest representatives to come to him. The army withdrew from Italy. For refugees and ruined cities, the distinction between strategic withdrawal and miraculous deliverance mattered little. Aquileia remained devastated. Captives moved north. Fields had been stripped. Families searched for missing relatives or accepted that they would never return. For Attila, the campaign had restored fear after Gaul. He had crossed into the Roman heartland, taken great cities, and left without suffering another battlefield setback. Yet he had not secured Honoria, gained permanent territory, or forced the Western Empire into the settlement he claimed. The pattern of his power was reaching its limit. Raids and campaigns could extract enormous wealth. Threat could create obedience. Subject kings could be held through victory and gifts. But conquest in the Roman sense required something else: garrisons, tax systems, officials, replacement governors, written procedures, and the patient occupation of places after the army moved on. Attila did not attempt to make Italy a Hunnic province. He did not place administrators in Milan or prepare a new capital in Aquileia. His empire controlled people more readily than land. It could compel a king to bring warriors. It could compel an emperor to pay tribute. It could empty a frontier zone. It was less suited to governing millions of farmers and cities through permanent institutions. That was not necessarily failure. Attila's objectives were his own, not Rome's. A ruler of the steppe did not need to become a Roman emperor to dominate Roman politics. Gold, captives, recognition, and the submission of neighboring leaders could sustain his order. The return from Italy must have been triumphant in appearance and uneasy beneath the surface. Wagons carried plunder and captives. Warriors could point to Aquileia, Milan, and the long road through the Po Valley as proof that Gaul had not weakened them. Attila had forced the highest representatives of the Western state, including the Bishop of Rome, to seek him out. Songs could present withdrawal as a decision made by a king who had taken what he required. Yet the political arithmetic had changed. Eastern tribute had ended. The Gallic campaign had failed to break Aetius' coalition. The Italian campaign had consumed horses and men without producing Honoria, a permanent Western settlement, or control of the peninsula. Subject kings still obeyed, but they had now seen the Hunnic center pushed back on a battlefield and limited by walls, disease, and distance. Attila responded as he always had, with plans for another demand. Threats against the Eastern Empire resumed. Envoys carried messages. Marcian prepared rather than paid. Within the royal household, sons who had spent their lives beneath one unquestioned father were approaching the age when followers would begin measuring their futures. A ruler can postpone succession by remaining stronger than every possible heir. He cannot prevent observers from preparing for the day strength ends. At the feast, Priscus had watched Attila look with unusual tenderness at Ernak. Other sons, especially Elik and Dingizic, possessed standing of their own. Wives and maternal relatives supported different branches. Subject kings knew that the death of the father would free them to renegotiate every promise. No one could know when that reckoning would come. Attila returned from Italy without a wound that threatened his life and without an enemy capable of entering his court. He appeared to have time for another campaign, another marriage, and another redistribution of the world around him. The empire's most dangerous weakness remained invisible because the man concealing it was still alive. At the royal center, the consequences of both Western campaigns arrived before the next campaign could begin. Captives were assigned or ransomed. Gold, cloth, weapons, animals, and ornaments were divided according to rank. Men who had lost horses or relatives expected compensation. Kings who had brought large contingents expected places and gifts that proved their service had been noticed. A ruler whose authority depended upon distribution could not leave victory as a general story. It had to become visible in specific hands. That process revealed success and measured discontent at the same time. The man who received less than expected remembered it. The branch of the royal family excluded from one marriage looked toward another. A subject ruler praised Attila in public while considering what would happen if Roman gold no longer returned in equal quantities. The court still obeyed. It was also already counting. No source describes him as ill. No enemy had captured him. No assassin from Constantinople had reached him. His death came during celebration. Early in 453, Attila took another wife, a young woman named Ildiko. Her name suggests a Germanic background, though almost nothing reliable is known about her. The marriage may have strengthened ties within the Confederation. It may also have been a personal choice inside a household where multiple political marriages were normal. A feast was held. Priscus's lost history survives here through the later writer Jordan's. The king drank heavily and retired for the night. By morning, attendants became concerned because the room remained silent. They entered. Attila was dead. Ildiko sat beside him, weeping beneath her veil. There was no wound described on the body. The traditional account says a sudden flow of blood, often understood as a severe nosebleed or internal hemorrhage, had entered his throat while he lay in a drunken sleep. Unable to wake or turn, he suffocated. Modern diagnoses remain guesses. A ruptured vessel, bleeding in the digestive tract, another acute medical event, or details altered through retelling could all fit parts of the story. Later suspicion naturally fell upon Ildiko. A young foreign bride beside a dead conqueror invited tales of revenge and assassination. No surviving evidence proves she killed him. The man who had survived Roman plots, vast battles, disease, and years of campaign died without a weapon in his hand. The news moved through the court. At first, it may have seemed impossible. Attila had made himself the fixed point around which everyone else moved. Orders came from him. Disputes ended before him. Roman gold entered through him. Subject kings measured danger through his mood. Now the wooden chair was empty. The empire still possessed armies. It no longer possessed the one man every army obeyed. The mourning described after Attila's death belonged to a warrior society and to later memory at the same time. Men cut their hair and wounded their faces so that, as Jordan's explained, the greatest warrior would be mourned not with women's tears, but with the blood of men. Horsemen circled the body and recited his deeds. A funeral feast, remembered by the name Strava, joined grief with celebration. The words of the lament survive only through a writer who recorded them generations later. They praised Attila as chief of the Huns, son of Munzuk, ruler of brave nations, possessor of Scythian and German realms, terror of both Roman empires, a man who had taken cities and accepted tribute without being defeated by treachery or enemy wound. The final line emphasized the strangeness of his death. Who could call it vengeance when no one had struck him? The body was enclosed, according to the same tradition, within coffins of gold, silver, and iron. Iron represented conquered peoples or the strength of war. Gold and silver represented the wealth taken from Rome. Weapons, ornaments, and signs of victory were buried with him. The grave was made at night. Those who dug it were killed so that no one could reveal the place. Every detail cannot be verified. Secret royal burials and the killing of witnesses belong to stories told about rulers whose tombs must remain undiscovered. Yet Attila's grave has never been securely found. Rivers, mounds, and fields across the Hungarian plain have all attracted claims. Treasure hunters have searched. Archaeologists have examined elite burials. None can be named with confidence as the resting place of the king. The secrecy has preserved his death more effectively than any monument. Roman emperors built mausoleums. Attila became a missing place. After the funeral, the sons faced one another. Attila had fathered several, perhaps many. The best known are Elik, Dingizic, and Ernak. They did not inherit a kingdom divided neatly by law. They inherited claims over peoples who had submitted to their father personally. Jordanes says the sons wished to divide subject nations among themselves, as though distributing household slaves. The image may reflect the hostility of those who later revolted, but the problem was real. Who owned the loyalty of an Ostrogothic king after Attila died? Who controlled the Gepids, Rugians, Syrians, and other peoples of the Confederation? Would warriors accept 3 or more centers of command? Would tribute be divided? Which son possessed the sacred authority, diplomatic relationships, and reputation that had made Roman emperors listen? Attila had kept his sons below him. None could become him while he lived. Now all were required to do so at once. Ardaric, king of the Gepids, had been one of Attila's most valued subject rulers. Priscus, or later tradition, presents him as a man admitted to the king's councils. His warriors had fought within the Hunnic order. He understood its strengths because he had helped create them. He also understood its weakness. Ardaric led a revolt of subject peoples against Attila's sons. The decisive struggle is remembered as the Battle of Nidao, usually dated to 454 or 455. The location is uncertain, and the surviving account comes mainly through Jordanes. Gepids and other former subjects fought the Huns and those who remained loyal to them. Goths, Rugians, Sueves, Herals, and Syrians may have been involved in the wider break, though exact alignments are difficult to reconstruct. Elik, Attila's eldest son and perhaps the strongest claimant, was killed. The defeat shattered Hunnic supremacy in the Carpathian Basin. It did not cause every Hun to vanish. Political collapse is not the same as the disappearance of people. Some groups retreated eastward. Some entered Roman service. Some joined other confederations. Families remained where they had settled and adopted new identities over generations. The name Hun continued to be used, sometimes precisely and sometimes as a broad label for steppe warriors. But the system centered on Attila could not be restored. The subject kings had discovered that the sons were divisible. Once one major people withdrew, others gained courage. The gold that had rewarded loyalty no longer arrived in the same flow. Martians still refused tribute. Roman diplomacy could encourage fragmentation more cheaply than it had purchased peace from the father. The empire dissolved along the lines from which it had been assembled. Dingizic continued fighting. He and Ernak appear to have led Hunnic groups in regions near the lower Danube and Black Sea. They sought land, markets, recognition, and favorable terms from the Eastern Empire. Their demands sounded familiar because they belonged to the frontier politics Attila had once dominated. The response was different. In the 460s, Dingizic demanded that the Romans open markets and provide territory or payments. Emperor Leo I refused to be intimidated as Theodosius had been. Hunnic forces crossed into Roman lands and fought without the overwhelming coalition their father had commanded. In 469, Dingizic was killed. His head was taken to Constantinople and displayed in the city. A generation earlier, Roman officials had carried gold out through the gates to satisfy Attila. Now crowds could look upon the severed head of his son. Ernak survived longer and may have ruled a smaller group near the lower Danube. Later sources connect descendants or related peoples with the complex steppe politics of the region, but the clear line disappears. The prophecy that Priscus heard about renewal through the youngest son did not restore Attila's empire. It did, however, preserve Ernak's name. The riders who had once made emperors wait for their answer became one element in a new frontier filled with Ostrogoths, Gepids, Avars, Bulgars, Romans, and many other powers still to come. The steppe did not remain empty. No political order there remained permanent. Attila's collapse is often explained by saying that he built nothing. That is too simple. He built relationships strong enough to gather armies across a vast region. He created a court capable of managing diplomacy with both Roman empires. He transformed tribute into loyalty and fear into political order. For almost 2 decades of shared and sole rule, he maintained authority over leaders who possessed armies of their own. What he did not build was a method for replacing himself. Perhaps no such method was possible within the balance he had created. A bureaucracy powerful enough to survive him might also have limited him. Clear succession rules could have elevated one son while provoking the others before his death. Permanent territorial administration would have required officials, records, and taxes that changed the nature of the confederation. Attila's empire was designed for a living center. When the center died, movement began in every direction. The Romans had prayed for that moment. They were about to discover that Attila had never been the only danger. Attila died in 453. Aetius died the following year. The two men had defined the Western crisis so completely that their disappearances seem almost paired. Yet Aetius did not fall in battle. He was killed inside the imperial court by the emperor he had spent decades protecting. Valentinian III had always lived beneath the shadow of his general. Aetius commanded armies, negotiated with federated peoples, arranged marriages, and held the political relationships that kept Gaul connected to the Western government. His success made him indispensable. It also made him frightening. After Attila's withdrawal, the emperor no longer faced the same immediate external threat. Court rivals encouraged suspicion. Aetius sought to strengthen his family by arranging a marriage between his son Gaudentius and Valentinian's daughter. The plan could place Aetius' descendants near the throne. In September 454, during a meeting in Ravenna, Valentinian drew a sword and attacked him. A court official joined the assault. The general who had survived civil wars, Hunnic alliances, Gothic rivalry, and the Catalaunian battlefield died before the emperor. A later saying captured the political blindness of the act. Valentinian, someone told him, had cut off his right hand with his left. 6 months later, 2 men associated with Aetius killed Valentinian in Rome. The emperor was watching military exercises when they struck. The guards did not save him. The dynasty that had ruled the West for generations ended in blood. The Western Roman Empire did not become safer after Attila. It became emptier of men capable of holding its alliances together. In 455, the Vandal king Gaiseric sailed from North Africa and entered Rome. Pope Leo again went out to negotiate, but this time the city was plundered for 2 weeks. The Vandals removed treasure and captives, including members of the imperial family. Attila had threatened Rome and withdrawn. Alaric had entered Rome in 410. Gaiseric now entered it in 455, and Odoacer would depose the last Western emperor in 476. Yet none became as complete a symbol of barbarian danger as the king who never crossed Rome's walls. Reputation did not follow results alone. Attila had approached at the moment Roman fear was searching for a single face, and memory gave it his. The Western throne passed through brief reigns, court murders, and military strongmen. Provinces still used Roman titles and law while obeying local kings. Franks and Visigoths expanded in Gaul. Vandals held North Africa. Italy remained Roman in culture and administration even as the authority of its emperors narrowed. Attila did not create this breakdown, and his death did not stop it. He exposed how far it had already gone. Aetius could defend Gaul only by gathering Goths, Alans, Franks, Burgundians, and surviving Roman forces into one coalition. The victory of 451 was real, but it depended upon powers that Ravenna could persuade, not command. That political world outlived both men. The memory of Attila then divided according to the needs of those who inherited it. Roman and Christian writers made him a scourge, a punishment permitted by God to strike a sinful empire. The image solved a theological problem. If a pagan king could humiliate Christian emperors, his success might seem to challenge divine protection. If he acted as an instrument of judgment, then victory proved punishment, withdrawal proved mercy, and sudden death proved that the instrument had been discarded. The title Scourge of God grew stronger in later tradition than it appears in the closest surviving evidence. It was too useful to disappear. Germanic heroic memory preserved another Attila. In the Nibelungenlied, he became Etzel. In Old Norse poetry, he appeared as Atli. These figures were not accurate biographies. They belonged to stories of treasure, marriage, vengeance, loyalty, and the destruction of royal families. Historical people separated by generations entered the same halls because oral tradition arranged the migration age according to drama rather than chronology. The transformation was possible because Attila's real court had already gathered many peoples. Priscus heard songs celebrating victories while the king was alive. When the confederation broke, Goths, Gepids, Huns, and others carried fragments of shared memory into different futures. Hungarian chronicles later connected Attila with the Magyars who entered the Carpathian Basin centuries after his death. A simple direct descent cannot be assumed. Medieval rulers often adopted ancient predecessors to explain why their dynasty belonged upon a particular land. Attila offered grandeur, antiquity, and a king whose imagined center lay on the same plane. Elsewhere, his name became an insult. To call an enemy a Hun or an Attila was to place him outside civilization before judging anything he had done. Later armies, nations, and political leaders were compared to the ancient writers because one word could summon burning cities, movement from the east, and defenses failing too late. The historical man became difficult to see beneath these uses. No authentic portrait survives. Artists supplied fur, crowns, long beards, curved swords, and faces drawn from the prejudices of their own centuries. Priscus gives the closest physical description: a short, broad-chested man with a large head, small eyes, a sparse beard touched with gray, a flat nose, and a proud, controlled manner. Even that portrait reaches us through fragments copied by later writers. No sword, saddle, crown, or cup can be identified with certainty as his. Archaeology reveals the confederation instead of the individual. Graves from the period contain Eastern and Western objects in combinations that resist simple labels. Horse equipment, weapons, jewelry, cauldrons, mirrors, and altered skull forms show mobility and cultural exchange. Ancient DNA has confirmed both long-distance connections with the Eurasian steppe and the great diversity of the people living under Hunnic power. The evidence supports the empire described by politics. Attila did not lead one unchanged tribe across a continent. He assembled people. His missing grave became the final space into which legend could enter. Stories placed it beneath a diverted river, inside a hidden mound, or under ordinary farmland. Treasure hunters repeatedly claimed to be close. None produced proof. Even a rich 5th century burial would require extraordinary evidence before it could be given the king's name. Perhaps an unmarked grave suited a ruler whose center had never depended upon stone. Roman emperors built monuments meant to control memory. Attila left an absence large enough for every generation to fill differently. What remains certain is that his power was strongest in motion. Gold, victory, audience, and fear drew kings and warriors toward one living center. When that center disappeared, no title or inheritance could reproduce the same balance. His sons received armies and claims, but not the authority that had made rival peoples accept one command. Rome survived weak or murdered emperors because offices, laws, cities, churches, taxes, and habits continued without them. Attila's order survived difference only while he could personally make difference serve him. To see that contrast one last time, return to Aquileia in 452. The defenders upon the walls could see dust, siege works, smoke, and riders. They could not see Roman gold distributed at distant feasts, Gothic kings balancing fear against ambition, sons waiting beneath their father, or subject peoples who would soon discover that the dynasty could be resisted. When Aquileia fell, Attila appeared unstoppable. Within a year, attendants opened a silent room and found him dead beside Ildico. Soon afterward, Elik fell at Nidao. In 469, the head of Dingizic was displayed in Constantinople. The political world that had approached the Adriatic like a storm broke into separate peoples and separate stories. Aquileia, damaged and diminished, continued to exist. Constantinople continued to rule. Rome lost its Western emperor and continued shaping law, church, language, and memory. Attila's empire vanished, but Attila did not. Behind the scourge, the heroic king, the Hungarian ancestor, and the modern insult remains the man Priscus watched at dinner. Gold shone before the guests. Warriors sang victories that would not survive in their own words. The king ate from wood and kept his face still. Then Ernak entered, and the expression softened. No one in the hall knew how little time remained. Outside, horses stood beneath the wide sky. Messengers waited to ride toward Rome and Constantinople. Subject kings measured their places. Roman envoys prepared careful phrases. Grass moved across land that would one day hide every trace of the royal household. Attila never needed to enter Rome to shake it. He made both Roman empires look beyond their walls and recognize that the balance of the world had changed. Then he died, and the balance changed again. The army passed. The court disappeared. The grave remained hidden. Only the name continued writing. Sleep well. Good night.